Midnight in St. Elora's is not marked by the gentle hush of sleep, but by the shuddering toll of a bell that cleaves the darkness. Its sound is not a call to prayer, nor a warning of fire or flood. It is something older, something that stirs the marrow and unsettles the soul. On the night of October 13th, 1861, the bell rang 12 times, each peal echoing through the stone lanes, rattling window panes, and waking the villagers with a dread they could not name. Some claimed the air itself changed, thickening with secrets and the scent of old, damp stone. Others swore they saw shadows moving against the moonlit walls, figures slipping between the gravestones, faces hidden beneath hoods. For generations, the bell tower had stood as a silent sentinel over St. Elora's, its presence both comfort and curse. But that night, its voice was different, urgent, insistent, almost pleading. In the days that followed, whispers spread like rot of a pact sealed in darkness, of a society that met beneath the bell's shadow, of villagers who vanished, and truths that twisted into legend. The official records are silent, but the stories persist, passed down in hushed tones, embroidered with fear and fascination. What really happened that night in 1861? Why did the bell toll at the forbidden hour, and who answered its call? Tonight, we descend into the heart of St. Elora's, peeling back the layers of myth and memory to uncover the secret society that changed everything. If you think you know the price of silence, think again. The bell is tolling for you. St. Elora's, in the autumn of 1861, was a village seemingly untouched by the chaos of the wider world. Nestled in a hollow between rolling, mist-shrouded hills, it was a place where the past clung to every stone and the present moved at the pace of the seasons. The village itself was a patchwork of slate-roofed cottages, their walls thick with centuries of soot and ivy, clustered around a narrow green where children played beneath the watchful eyes of their elders. The lanes were crooked and uneven, paved with ancient cobbles that remembered the footsteps of generations long dead. At the heart of St. Elora's stood the Church of St. Elora the Penitent, a brooding edifice of blackened stone and stained glass, its spire clawing at the sky like a warning finger. The churchyard was crowded with leaning gravestones, their inscriptions worn smooth by wind and rain, the names of the lost barely legible. But it was the bell tower that dominated the village, rising above the rooftops like a sentinel. Its silhouette was stark and severe, its windows narrow and unwelcoming, and its great iron bell cast in a forgotten century hung silent, except for those rare, fateful nights. By day, St. Elora's wore a mask of piety and order. The villagers attended church with dutiful regularity, their voices rising in hymns that echoed off the cold stone. The vicar, a man of gentle manners and careful words, presided over baptisms and burials with equal solemnity. The schoolhouse, a squat building of red brick, rang with the laughter of children reciting their lessons. In the market square, women bartered for bread and cheese, and men discussed the harvest and the coming winter. To the casual visitor, St. Elora's was a model of rural virtue, a place where everyone knew their place, and every day unfolded much like the last. Yet beneath this surface calm, there was a tension that could not be named. The villagers' smiles were polite, but guarded, their conversations careful, as if each word might be overheard by someone who should not hear it. Doors were locked before sunset and curtains drawn tight against the night. Children were warned never to stray near the bell tower after dark, and even the bravest boys dared each other only in whispers. There were stories. Of course, every village has its legends, but in St. Elora's, the stories were not told for amusement. They were warnings passed from parent to child, reminders of boundaries that must not be crossed. The bell tower itself was the source of most of these tales. Some said it was built on cursed ground, that the earth beneath it was salted with the bones of heretics and outcasts. Others claimed the bell was forged from metal, taken from a shipwreck, its sound forever tainted by the screams of the drowned. The truth, as always, was more complicated and more dangerous. For the bell tower was not merely a relic of faith, but a place of gathering, a place where, on certain nights, a select few would climb the spiral stairs and disappear into the shadows above. The contrast between the village's outward innocence and its hidden fears was starkest in the eyes of its people. The old women who crossed themselves at every toll of the bell, the young men who drank too much and spoke too little, the children who played at the edge of the churchyard but never dared to enter after dusk. There was a sense that something watched from the tower's highest window, something that remembered every secret, every sin. St. Elora's was a village suspended between worlds, the world of daylight, with its rituals and reassurances, and the world of night, where the bell tower loomed and the past refused to stay buried. It was here, in this uneasy balance, that the events of 1861 would unfold, events that would shatter this illusion of innocence and reveal the darkness at the heart of the village. And as the autumn mists thickened and the nights grew longer, the people of St. Elora's could not help but wonder what price they would pay for the secrets they kept. Every story of darkness and revelation is shaped by those who walk its shadowed corridors. And in St. Elora's, the fates of a few would come to define the destiny of all. Some were born to the village, their roots tangled deep in its soil. Others arrived as strangers, carrying secrets of their own. Together, they formed a cast of characters as complex and contradictory as the village itself, outsiders and chosen, innocents and conspirators, each drawn inexorably toward the bell tower's silent heart. First among them was the bell ringer, a figure both familiar and unknowable. His name was Elias Finch, though few used it. To most, he was simply the bellman, a solitary soul who lived in a cramped cottage at the edge of the churchyard. Elias was a man of indeterminate age, his hair prematurely silvered, his eyes the color of storm clouds. He moved with a quiet grace, his presence barely more than a shadow in the periphery of village life. Children whispered that he could speak to the dead, that he knew the names of every ghost in the graveyard. Adults, for their part, kept their distance, offering curt nods and wary glances. Yet it was Elias who climbed the tower's winding stairs each Sunday, who tended the bell's ancient mechanism, who alone held the keys to the tower's heavy oak door. Some pitied him, others feared him, but all agreed that he was necessary, a keeper of rituals, a guardian of boundaries best left uncrossed. The arrival of the new vicar, Reverend Jonathan Halley, marked a turning point in the village's quiet equilibrium. Young, earnest, and freshly ordained, Hall came to St. Elora's with a heart full of hope and a mind sharpened by theological study. He saw the village as a flock in need of guidance, its traditions as quaint relics to be gently modernized. With his clear blue eyes and gentle voice, he won the trust of many, especially the women and children who found comfort in his sermons. Yet there was a naivety to Hall, a sense that he underestimated the weight of the past. He was drawn to the bell tower, fascinated by its history, and often lingered in the church long after the congregation had gone. Some saw in him a savior, others a meddler. For all his good intentions, Halley was an outsider, and the village had a way of testing those who did not understand its rules. Equally out of place was Margaret Linton, the school teacher. Margaret was a woman of sharp intellect and sharper tongue, a product of the city who had come to St. Elora's seeking peace after a personal tragedy she never discussed. She dressed plainly, her hair always pulled back, her eyes quick to catch any sign of mischief among her pupils. Margaret believed in reason, in the power of education to dispel ignorance and fear. She scoffed at the village's superstitions, dismissing tales of curses and pacts as the products of overactive imaginations. Yet beneath her skepticism was a deep well of empathy, a longing to protect the children in her care from the shadows that seemed to gather at the edge of every lesson. She watched the villagers with a mixture of affection and frustration, never quite able to bridge the gap between her world and theirs. Then there were the society's shadowy members, the chosen few who moved through the village with an air of quiet authority. Their names were rarely spoken aloud, but their influence was felt in every corner of St. Elora's. There was Mr. Barrow, the church warden, whose stern face and iron grip on the parish accounts made him both respected and feared. Mrs. Pritchard, the midwife, whose knowledge of herbs and whispered prayers was said to be as old as the hills. And Thomas Gray, the miller, whose laughter was loudest at the harvest feasts, but whose eyes never quite met your own. These were the keepers of the old ways, the guardians of secrets passed down through generations. They met in shadowed rooms, their gatherings marked by coded phrases and ritual gestures. Their loyalty to the society absolute, empathy and suspicion wove themselves around these characters like ivy on stone. Elias, with his haunted silences, seemed both victim and accomplice. Hale's innocence was a shield and a weakness, his faith a candle flickering in a storm. Margaret's skepticism was her armor, but also her blind spot. The society's members, for all their piety, carried the weight of unspoken sins. Each played their part in the unfolding mystery, their choices shaped by fear, hope, and the relentless pull of the pastas. The days grew shorter, and the bell tower's shadow lengthened. These lives would intersect in ways none could foresee. Some would seek the truth, others would hide from it, and a few would do anything to protect the pact that bound them all. In St. Elora's, no one was truly innocent, and every secret had its price. The stage was set, the players assembled, and the bell silent for now waited to toll again. It began, as such things often do, with a whisper or rumor that slipped through the hedgerows and drifted beneath doorways, growing in the telling. The first sign was so subtle that most dismissed it, a flock of crows circling the bell tower. At dusk, their cries harsh and insistent, as if warning of something unseen. The children watched from the green, their games forgotten, while the adults muttered about omens and hurried home before the last light faded. That night, the bell tolled once, a single hollow note that echoed through the village long after it should have faded. No one admitted to hearing it, but the next morning, the air was thick with unease. The days that followed brought a series of small disturbances, each more unsettling than the last. Livestock vanished from locked barns, their tracks ending abruptly. At the edge of the churchyard, windows were found open that had been shut tight, and strange symbols, circles within circles, marked in chalk or scratched into wood, appeared on doors and gateposts. Margaret Linton, ever the skeptic, dismissed these as childish pranks, but even she could not explain the cold drafts that crept through her classroom or the way her pupils stared, wide-eyed, at the bell tower during lessons. It was Elias Finch who first noticed the pattern. He kept a careful record of the bell's maintenance, noting every creak and groan of the ancient mechanism. One morning, he found a scrap of parchment wedged between the gears, its surface covered in spidery handwriting. The message was simple but chilling. The hour approaches. Prepare the way. Elias showed it to no one, but his hands trembled as he locked the tower door behind him. That night, the bell tolled again twice, this time at the hour of 3. The sound was softer, almost muffled, as if the bell itself were reluctant to speak. Reverend Hall, eager to reassure his flock, called a meeting in the church. He spoke of faith and vigilance, urging the villagers to trust in God and one another. But his words rang hollow against the growing tide of fear. Mrs. Pritchard, the midwife, whispered to her neighbors that the signs were clear. The old stories were returning, and the bell was their herald. Thomas Gray, the miller, began to drink more heavily, his laughter growing brittle and forced. Even Mr. Barrow, the unflappable churchwarden, was seen pacing the churchyard at midnight, his face pale in the moonlight. Then came the first disappearance. It was a boy, Samuel Carter, barely 12 years old. He had been sent to fetch water from the well at dusk and never returned. His mother found the bucket lying on its side, the water spilled into the dust, and a trail of small, muddy footprints leading toward the bell tower. The village searched through the night, lanterns bobbing, like will-o'-the-wisps among the gravestones, but there was no sign of Samuel. Only the crows remained, perched in a silent, watchful ring atop the tower. The next morning, a new message appeared, this time scrawled in charcoal on the church door. One for the bell, one for the Pact. The words sent a shiver through the congregation, and even Margaret found herself glancing over her shoulder as she walked home. The children grew quiet, their games forgotten, and the adults spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting to the tower whenever the wind shifted. As the days passed, the pattern repeated. Another villager vanished, a young woman named Alice, last seen near the churchyard at twilight. Her shawl was found snagged on the iron fence, and beneath it, a single black feather. The bell tolled 3 times that night, each note lower and more mournful than the last. The villagers began to lock their doors before sunset, and the streets emptied long before the final rays of light slipped behind the hills. Margaret, driven by a mixture of fear and defiance, began to keep a journal of the events. She noted the times of the bell, the names of the missing, the strange symbols that multiplied across the village. She confronted Elias, demanding answers, but he only shook his head and muttered about old debts and promises best left unspoken. Reverend Halley, too, grew more withdrawn, his sermons tinged with desperation as he struggled to hold his flock together. The tension reached its breaking point on the night of the harvest moon. The village was cloaked in mist, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. At midnight, the bell tolled not once, not twice, but 12 times each, peal louder and more insistent than the last. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, rattling the windows and setting the dogs to howling. In the morning, the village awoke to find that Thomas Gray, the miller, was gone. His boots stood neatly by his bed, his coat hung on its peg, but the man himself had vanished without a trace. The only clue was a single muddy footprint on the stairs leading up to the bell tower, and the door, which Elias swore he had locked, standing wide open to the dawn. With each disappearance, the fabric of St. Elora's began to unravel. The village that once prided itself on unity and tradition now found itself gripped by a feverish paranoia. Every neighbor a potential suspect, every shadow a possible threat. The bell tower, once a symbol of communal faith, became a looming specter, its silhouette a constant reminder of the darkness that had crept into their midst. It started with whispers, furtive conversations behind closed doors, glances exchanged. Over market stalls, the sudden hush that fell whenever a stranger passed by. The villagers, who had once gathered in the square to share news and laughter, now kept to their homes, peering through lace curtains and bolting their doors at the first sign of dusk. The children, once so bold, no longer played near the churchyard. Their games had changed, too. Now they dared each other to run to the bell tower and back, but none ever made it past the iron gate. The church, which should have been a sanctuary, became a crucible for the village's growing fear. Reverend Halley, desperate to maintain order, intensified his sermons, his voice rising in the cold stone nave as he thundered against sin and temptation. He spoke of the devil's work, of the need for vigilance and repentance, his words echoing off the walls and settling like dust on the congregation. Some found comfort in his certainty, clinging to the rituals of prayer and confession as if they could ward off the evil that stalked their streets. Others, however, saw in Hale's fervor a dangerous zeal, a willingness to see guilt where there was only grief. It was Mrs. Pritchard, the midwife, who first gave voice to the suspicion that had been festering beneath the surface. She stood in the churchyard after evening service, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, and declared that the disappearances were not the work of chance or misfortune, but of someone within their own ranks. The bell tolls for a reason, she said, her voice carrying in the stillness. And someone here knows why. Her words spread like wildfire, igniting old grudges and new accusations. The villagers began to watch each other with narrowed eyes, cataloging every slight, every secret, every unexplained absence. Margaret Linton, ever the outsider, found herself the subject of more than one pointed conversation. Her skepticism, once tolerated as harmless eccentricity, now marked her as suspect. Some whispered that she had brought the curse with her from the city, that her refusal to attend church was a sign of hidden wickedness. Margaret, for her part, refused to be. Cowed, she continued to keep her journal, documenting the village's descent with a mixture of horror and fascination. Yet even she could not deny the chill that crept up her spine each time the bell tolled, or the sense that something ancient and implacable was at work. Elias Finch, the bell ringer, became a figure of both pity and dread. He was seen less in the village, his gaunt face glimpsed only in the early hours as he tended the graves or vanished into the tower. Some said he was in league with the forces that haunted St. Elora's, that he alone could silence the bell if he chose. Others believed he was cursed, a man doomed to bear witness to the village's suffering. When a group of young men confronted him one night, demanding to know what he did in the tower after dark, Elias simply looked at them with haunted eyes and said, "I keep the old promises." That is all. The society's shadowy members, Mr. Barrow, Mrs. Pritchard, and the others, tightened their grip on the village. They called secret meetings, their gatherings marked by candlelight and whispered prayers. They spoke of the need for unity, for sacrifice, for the protection of the community at all costs. But their words were laced with threats, and their actions bred only more suspicion. Those who questioned them found themselves shunned, their names added to a growing list of the untrustworthy. Faith, once a source of comfort, became a weapon. The villagers turned to old rituals, lighting candles in their windows, hanging sprigs of rowan above their doors, reciting prayers that had not been spoken in a generation. Some sought solace in confession, unburdening themselves to Reverend Halley in the hope of absolution. Others turned inward, nursing their fears in silence, convinced that the only way to survive was to trust no one. The contrast between innocence and guilt grew ever sharper. The children, who could not understand the full weight of what was happening, sensed only that the adults were afraid. They whispered stories of the bell tower, of ghosts and monsters, of secret societies that met beneath the church. Their innocence became a kind of shield, but it could not protect them from the tension that crackled in the air. As the nights grew longer and the mists thickened, the village seemed to shrink in on itself, every home an island, every heart a fortress. The bell tower loomed over it all, its silent windows watching, its secrets locked away behind stone and shadow. The villagers prayed for deliverance, but in their prayers was a note of desperation, a sense that whatever had been unleashed could not be so easily banished. And so St. Elora's descended, step by step, into a darkness of its own making, a darkness fed by fear, by fervor, by the secrets that no one dared to name. The line between faith and manipulation blurred, and the price of survival grew steeper. With each passing day, the bell, silent now, waited for the hour when it would toll again, and the village waited with it, caught between hope and dread, innocence and guilt, faith and the shadow that faith could not dispel. Margaret Linton had always believed that every mystery, no matter how tangled, could be unraveled with enough patience and reason. Yet as the shadows lengthened over St. Elora's, she found herself questioning the very foundation of her convictions. The village was no longer a place of simple routines and familiar faces. It had become a labyrinth of secrets, every path leading back to the bell tower, and the Pact whispered about in the dark. Still, Margaret refused to surrender to fear. If the truth was hidden, she would find it even if it meant venturing where others dared not tread. Her investigation began with the journal she had kept since the first disappearance. Each entry was a careful record of events, the times the bell tolled, the names of the missing, the strange symbols that appeared and vanished overnight. But as she pored over her notes, a pattern began to emerge, one that pointed not to random misfortune, but to deliberate design. The symbols, she realized, were not mere graffiti. They were marks of passage, left at the homes of those who vanished, and always in the days before the bell tolled at forbidden hours. Margaret's first real breakthrough came by accident. While searching for a missing arithmetic book in the schoolhouse attic, she discovered a loose floorboard. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine, was a battered leather diary. The handwriting inside was unfamiliar, spidery, urgent, and filled with references to the Chosen and the Pact. The entries spoke of midnight gatherings, of oaths sworn in the shadow of the bell tower, of sacrifices made for the good of the village. One passage chilled her to the bone. The bell is our covenant. Its voice binds us, its silence damns. U.S. We are the keepers and the kept. Margaret's first instinct was to bring the diary to Reverend Hall, but something stopped her. She remembered the way the villagers had turned outsiders, the way suspicion had become a weapon. Instead, she sought out Elias Finch. She found him in the churchyard at dawn, tending the graves with his usual silent diligence. When she showed him the diary, he grew pale, his hands trembling as he traced the faded ink. "This is not for you," he whispered, but Margaret pressed him. "If you know something, Elias, you must tell me. People are disappearing. The village is tearing itself apart." Elias hesitated, then nodded. "There are things you do not understand, Miss Linton. The Pact was made long before you came. It was meant to protect us, to keep the darkness at bay. But every promise has its price." He led her to the bell tower, unlocking the heavy door with a key that hung from a chain around his neck. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old metal. The spiral staircase creaked beneath their feet as they climbed, each step echoing in the gloom. At the top, Elias revealed a hidden alcove behind a loose stone. Inside were more diaries, some centuries old, each chronicling the history of the Pact. There were lists of names, some crossed out, others circled in red. There were coded messages, written in a cipher, Margaret recognized from the symbols around the village. As she leafed through the pages, the truth became clear. The secret society was real, its members drawn from the village's most respected families. They met in the bell tower on nights when the moon was full, performing rituals meant to ensure the village's prosperity. But the rituals demanded sacrifice first animals. Then, when the omens grew dire, people. The disappearances were not random. They were offerings chosen by the society to fulfill the terms of the Pact. Margaret's rational mind recoiled from the horror of it, but the evidence was undeniable. She confronted Reverend Hall, hoping for an ally, but found only confusion and fear. Halle, for all his faith, was an outsider too. He had heard rumors, but never believed them. Now, faced with the truth, he struggled to reconcile his beliefs with the reality before him. "We must tell the village," he insisted, but Margaret shook her head. "They won't believe us, not without proof. And if the society suspects we know, we could be next." Together, they devised a plan. Margaret would continue her investigation, gathering as much evidence as possible. Halle would use his position to observe the society's members, looking for signs of guilt or complicity. They agreed to meet in secret, sharing their findings and watching each other's backs. The contrast between reason and superstition became ever more stark. Margaret relied on logic and deduction, piecing together clues from diaries, symbols, and whispered conversations. Halle, meanwhile, turned to prayer and intuition, seeking guidance in scripture and dreams. Both found themselves drawn deeper into the village's web of secrets, their roles as outsiders both a shield and a curse. As the next full moon approached, the tension in St. Elora's reached a fever pitch. The society's members grew more secretive, their meetings more frequent. Margaret discovered a hidden passage beneath the church, leading to a chamber lined with candles and strange carvings. There, she found a list of names her own among them, along with Elias, Halle, and several others who had asked too many questions. The realization hit her like a blow. The society knew she was investigating. The next ritual would not be a simple gathering. It would be a reckoning. Margaret and Hall met one last time before the fateful night. "If anything happens to me," she told him, pressing the diary into his hands, "promise me you'll tell the truth. The village deserves to know." Halle nodded, his face grave. "And if I fall, you must finish what we started. No more secrets." As the moon rose over St. Elora's, the bell tower cast its long shadow across the village. The stage was set for the final confrontation. The truth balanced on a knife's edge between reason and superstition, outsider and insider, faith and fear. If you were in Margaret's place, what would you do? Would you risk everything to expose the pact? Or would you protect yourself and let the darkness remain? Share your thoughts below, because in St. Elora's, every choice has a price, and every secret demands a sacrifice. Midnight in St. Elora's. The village lay shrouded in a fog, so dense it seemed to muffle even the sound of breath. The moon, swollen and pale, hovered behind a veil of cloud, casting the bell tower in a ghostly glow. Every window was dark, every door bolted, but beneath the hush, a current of dread pulsed through the stones and soil. Tonight, the pact would be renewed or broken. Margaret moved through the mist with her heart pounding in her throat, the diary clutched to her chest. She had watched the society's members slip from their homes, faces hidden beneath hoods, lanterns bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps as they converged on the church. She followed at a distance, careful to keep to the shadows, her every step prayer that she would not be seen. In the graveyard, the crows had gathered again, silent and watchful, their black eyes glinting in the moonlight. Inside the church, the air was thick with incense and fear. The pews had been pushed aside, the altar draped in black cloth. Candles flickered along the walls, their flames guttering in the draught. At the center of the nave stood a circle of figures: Mr. Barrow, Mrs. Pritchard, Thomas Gray, and others whose faces were hidden by the hoods of their cloaks. In their midst, Elias Finch knelt, his head bowed, his hands bound with red cord. The bell rope hung above him, swaying gently as if moved by an unseen hand. Margaret pressed herself against the cold stone, straining to hear. The society's leader Barrow, his voice low and trembling, began the ritual. "We are the keepers of the pact. We are the guardians of St. Elora's. By the tolling of the bell, we bind ourselves to the old promise. By the sacrifice of one, we preserve the many." The words echoed through the nave, heavy with centuries of repetition. Margaret's mind raced. She had read of the pact in the diaries, but the reality was more monstrous than she had imagined. The society believed that the village's prosperity, its good harvests, its protection from plague and famine depended on the bell tower's secret. Each year, on the night of the harvest moon, a sacrifice was chosen. Sometimes it was an animal, sometimes a stranger, sometimes, when the omens were dire, one of their own. The bell was both witness and judge, its toll sealing the fate of the chosen. Elias's voice broke the silence. You promised this would end. You said the old ways would die with the last generation. Barrow's reply was cold. The pact is older than any of us. It cannot be broken. You were chosen, Elias. You knew the price. Margaret's hands shook as she watched. She wanted to scream, to rush forward, to stop what was about to happen. But fear rooted her in place. She saw Mrs. Pritchard step forward, a knife glinting in her hand. The society began to chant, their voices rising and falling in a language Margaret did not recognize. The bell rope swung wider, the shadows on the walls twisting and writhing as if alive. Suddenly, a crash echoed through the church. Reverend Hawley burst through the doors, his face wild with terror and resolve. "Stop this madness," he cried, his voice cracking. "This is not faith, this is murder." The society turned as one, their chant faltering. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then Barrow raised his hand, and two of the cloaked figures seized Hawley, dragging him to the center of the circle. "You do not understand," Barrow hissed. "Without the pact, the village will fall. We have all lost something to the bell. We have all paid the price." Margaret could bear it no longer. She stepped from the shadows, holding the diary aloft. "No more secrets," she shouted. "I know what you've done. I know the truth. If you kill again, I will expose you. I will tell the world." The society recoiled, their faces pale in the candlelight. For a heartbeat, hope flickered in Margaret's chest. But then Mrs. Pritchard advanced, her eyes cold and empty. "You think the world will care? You think they will believe you? The bell is older than your reason, older than your faith. It will toll, and the pact will hold." Elias struggled to his feet, his voice hoarse. "Let it end with me. Spare the others. Break the chain." Barrow hesitated, the knife wavering in his hand. The society's chant faltered, uncertainty, rippling through the circle. Hawley, bloody but unbowed, met Margaret's gaze. "We can end this," he whispered. "We must." In that moment, the bell tolled once, twice, 12 times. The sound was deafening, shaking the very stones of the church. The candles guttered and died, plunging the nave into darkness. The society cried out, some collapsing to their knees, others fleeing into the shadows. Margaret felt the ground shift beneath her, the air thick with centuries of grief and guilt. When the echoes faded, the church was silent. The society's members had scattered, their ritual broken. Elias lay on the floor, his bonds cut, his face streaked with tears. Hawley knelt beside him, murmuring prayers. Margaret stood in the center of the nave, the diary still clutched in her hand, her heart pounding with relief and horror. The true nature of the Bell Tower Pact had been revealed, not a covenant with God, but a bargain with fear, a tradition of blood and silence passed down through generations. The price paid was not just the lives lost, but the innocence of the village itself. St. Elora's would never be the same. Outside, the bell tower loomed against the night sky, its shadow stretching across the graves. The pact was broken, but the scars would remain. And as the first light of dawn crept over the hills, Margaret wondered if the darkness had truly been banished, or if it had simply found a new place to hide. Dawn broke over St. Elora's with a pale, uncertain light, as if the sun itself hesitated to touch the village. The fog lingered longer than usual, clinging to the gravestones and curling around the bell tower's base. In the hush that followed, the night's violence, the village seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a sign that the world had not changed forever. But nothing was as it had been. The bell tower, once a symbol of order and tradition, now loomed as a monument to secrets and sorrow. Word of what had transpired in the church spread quickly, though the details shifted with each telling. Some whispered that the society had been unmasked, that the old ways were finished at last. Others insisted the ritual had failed, and that the village would pay a terrible price for its defiance. Most, however, simply avoided the subject, their eyes sliding away from the tower, their voices dropping to a hush whenever the bell was mentioned. The silence was not relief, but a wound raw, unhealed, and festering. Families mourned in private, their grief complicated by shame and confusion. The Carters, who had lost young Samuel, kept their curtains drawn, refusing visitors. Alice's mother wandered the lanes at dusk, calling her daughter's name into the mist, her voice growing thinner with each passing day. The Gray household, once the heart of every village celebration, was shuttered and silent. Even those who had not lost loved ones felt the weight of absence, the sense that something vital had been torn from the fabric of their lives. Reverend Halley, his faith battered but not broken, tried to offer comfort. He visited the bereaved, prayed with the fearful, and spoke gently of forgiveness and healing. Yet his sermons were quieter now, his eyes shadowed by what he had witnessed. He no longer spoke of certainty, but of endurance, of the need to carry on, even when the path ahead was obscured by doubt. Some found solace in his humility, while others turned away, unable to reconcile their suffering with the promises of faith. Margaret Linton became both pariah and confidant. Some villagers blamed her for stirring up old ghosts, for exposing wounds that might have been better left to fester in darkness. Others sought her out in secret, desperate to unburden themselves, to confess what they had seen or done. She listened, her journal now a record not just of events, but of pain and longing. She saw the toll the Pact had taken, not just in lives lost, but in trust shattered, in innocence destroyed. The children, once so quick to laugh, now played in silence, their games shadowed by fear. The adults moved through their days with a new wariness, as if expecting the bell to toll again at any moment. Elias Finch, freed from his role as bell ringer, became a ghost in his own right. He rarely left his cottage, and when he did, he moved, with the careful steps of a man who had seen too much. Some pitied him, others avoided him, but all understood that he carried the heaviest burden. The bell tower, stripped of its rituals, stood empty and cold. Yet at night, some claimed to hear footsteps on the stairs, or to see a flicker of candlelight behind the narrow windows. The tower's presence was inescapable, a reminder of what had been done and what could never be undone. The societies, former members scattered, their power broken, their secrets exposed. Some left the village altogether, seeking anonymity in distant towns. Others remained, their influence diminished, their reputations forever stained. The old alliances were gone, replaced by a wary truce, a fragile peace built on the ruins of trust. The rituals that had once bound the community together were abandoned, their meaning lost, their cost too high to bear. Yet the scars ran deeper than any could have imagined. The villagers found themselves haunted not by ghosts, but by memories of choices made in fear, of silences kept for the sake of survival. The bell tower, once a place of gathering, became a symbol of isolation. Its shadow stretched across the village, a constant reminder that darkness, once invited in, is not so easily banished. In the months that followed, St. Elora's struggled to find its footing. The fields were tended, the market reopened, and the church bells rang again, though never at midnight, and never with the same certainty. Life resumed, but it was a different life, marked by caution and the knowledge that evil can wear the face of tradition, that safety can be bought at a terrible price. Some nights, when the wind was right, the villagers claimed they could still hear the bell tolling faintly, as if from a great distance. Whether it was memory or warning, no one could say, but all agreed on one thing. The echoes in the tower would never truly fade, and the story of the bell tower pact would linger, a shadow at the heart of St. Elora's, for generations to come. In the end, the story of St. Elora's is not just a tale of vanished villagers and midnight rituals. It is a meditation on the shadows we keep, those secrets we inherit, protect, and sometimes pass on, believing they shield us from a greater darkness. The Bell Tower Pact was born from fear, but it endured because of something deeper, the longing to belong, to be part of a community, even if that community is built on silence and sacrifice. What is it that drives people to such extremes? Is it the promise of safety, the comfort of tradition, or the terror of being cast out? In St. Elora's, the pact was both a prison and a lifeline, binding its members together in complicity and guilt. Power in such a place is not always wielded with malice. Sometimes it is the quiet hand on your shoulder, the whispered warning, the unspoken rule that everyone obeys, because to break it, it would mean standing alone. We like to believe that we are different, that our own communities are free from such bargains, but are we? How many of us have kept silent when we should have spoken, or looked away from injustice for the sake of peace? What secrets do we keep, not just from others, but from ourselves? Would you have joined the pact if it meant protecting those you loved? Or would you have risked everything to break the silence, knowing the cost? Perhaps the most unsettling truth is that the shadows of St. Elora's are not unique. Every village, every town, every family has its own bell tower, its own place where secrets are kept, where the past is both shield and shackle. The need to belong, to be safe, to be part of something larger than ourselves is as old as humanity. And so, the question lingers. What would you have done, standing in the nave at midnight, with the bell tolling overhead and the eyes of the society upon you? I invite you to share your thoughts, your theories, your own stories of secrets and silence. Would you have joined the pact or tried to break it? What shadows linger in your own community, waiting for someone brave enough to bring them into the light? The story of St. Elora's is over, but the questions it raises remain echoing, like the bell, long after the last note has faded. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of St. Elora's, a place where the past is never truly buried, and every secret leaves its mark. If you've made it this far, you're not just a viewer. You're a fellow seeker, someone unafraid to peer into the shadows and ask the questions others would rather leave unspoken. Your curiosity, your willingness to reflect and engage, is what keeps stories like this alive. If this tale has unsettled you or made you wonder about the hidden pacts and silent bargains in your own world, I invite you to become part of this community. Subscribe for more stories that dig beneath the surface, that challenge what we think we know about history, fear, and the human heart. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in St. Elora's? What mysteries haunt your own hometown? Your insights and theories are what make this channel a gathering place for those who crave more than easy answers. And if you're hungry for another descent into the unknown, don't miss our next episode, where we'll unravel the chilling legend of the Ashwood Orphanage, a place where innocence was lost, and the echoes of the past still linger in the empty halls. You won't want to miss the secrets we're about to uncover. Some say the bell of St. Elora's still tolls for those who listen, its echo a warning and an invitation. Will you hear it? Will you dare to follow where it leads? Until next time, keep your eyes open, your mind sharp, and remember, every village has its shadows. The question is, who among us is brave enough to face them?